I am a human being and I killed human beings.
Before I knew it, I'd fired 4 shots at the door. I kept on shouting for Riva to phone the police.
Tests are underway to determine if a serial killer is on the loose in Centurion, Pretoria.
The dead won't bother you. It's the living you gotta worry about.
Welcome once again to Profiler Africa, true crime fans. It's a pleasure to have you here with us as always. We are not live tonight because we have a very special guest lined up for you and a really amazing conversation about a part of the crime universe that we've not delved into in much detail as yet. So a real treat for you tonight. Before we light this one up, a quick reminder. Subscribe to Profiler Africa for real, unfiltered true crime. It really does help if you subscribe to the channel and support the cause. You can also become a member to unlock exclusive content and back this growing independent media platform. You can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/Profiler Africa. And while you're watching along tonight, if you'd like to smash a super like, we welcome those as well. Of course, we appreciate your support, and in return, we will continue to bring you some amazing true crime stories. Tonight, we're diving into a different kind of crime scene, one fueled by fire, obsession, and cold calculation. Our guest is one of the most decorated arson investigators in the world. He's a fire death scene expert, a criminal profiler, a veteran of over 2,100 arson cases. He spent decades hunting down serial arsonists and fire killers, and we will meet him momentarily. Joining me, as always, is Gerard Labuskaghni, the former head of the forensic psychology section at SAPS, and he is, of course, the mighty profiler. Okay, so Gerard, I'm going to then hand over to you so that you can explain to us how it is that you came to meet our guest tonight. And please introduce tonight's incredible guest.
So for the listeners, I first got to meet our guest tonight when in September 2012, I was very fortunate enough to go. I was busy with my profiler training, and part of that we had to do a homicide investigation course. So myself and Colonel Jan de Lange, that many of you have seen on the show before and know about, were fortunate enough to go to the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department's homicide school, which I think was a 2 or 3 week course now, just off the top of my head, I can't remember, in Los Angeles. And amazing course, phenomenal presenters, phenomenal, it was a really, really well done course. And one of those lectures was by our guest tonight, Ed Nordskog, and was essentially on arson and bomb profile and investigation. And I just found an absolutely phenomenal field, a nice blend of interesting investigations, but of course the psychology of it. And that's where I had the pleasure of meeting you, Ed. And I think we've just kept contact over the years. And then you ended up coming out to South Africa to present some training to SAPS, to my unit, which we'll see some photographs in a moment, and also to SAPS arson investigators. And just kept all the contact all those years. So it's a real pleasure to have you, Ed, and welcome.
Thanks, Gerard. Good seeing you again. And thank you again for bringing me to Africa twice. So I appreciate that, and having me work with your people. I really enjoyed that. I'm happy to be here with you and Paul.
Great. And I mean, what I learned back then and through our interactions with you is that you get a lot of people doing what you do, but not a lot of people doing it well. And there are very few people in the world who really, I think, could, with a lot of credibility, stand up there and call themselves arson and bomb investigators and the sort of profiling side of it too. And I'm happy to say I'm quite comfortable with you being one of those few people.
Well, thank you. In my field, there is a lot of people in the fire arson investigation field, but it's a huge field. And what a lot of people don't realize that there's a lot of civil, non-criminal fire investigators, because over half the fires are not crimes. They're accidental events of some sort, but there's still investigators that deal with those. And actually those fires create a lot of money for somebody. I am not in that field, the civil fire investigation field. I've spent the last 25, 27 years now in the criminal fire investigation field with the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, a law enforcement agency. And now I'm retired from that agency, but I still do weekly, in fact, almost daily, fire death cases for law enforcement and fire agencies.
And how did you get into the world of law enforcement? And when did you realize that arson and bomb investigation is something that you're interested in?
Well, I was 12 years old when I read a book. My mom had a book, and it was by a police author in Los Angeles. If you're from Los Angeles, you'll know the famous Joseph Wambaugh, who just passed about a month ago. He wrote a ton of books on the Los Angeles police and police officers. And he caused many people like me to come to Los Angeles to want to be a police officer. So I did. I'd spent some time in the military, the Marines in the United States. And then after that, when I was 26 years old, I joined the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, which is a huge law enforcement agency, the largest sheriff's department in the world. And there's just under 10,000 officers on that department. So it's a very large agency, and it's a very fast agency, meaning there's a lot of work. And I had no interest whatsoever in arson or bomb. I was unaware completely that an arson and bomb unit existed in that department. I was going to work as a homicide investigator. But to get to that, I had to spend several years as a detective, undercover detective, narcotics officer, things like that. And then I was picked the same day to join either the arson bomb unit or the homicide unit. And I ended up going to the arson bomb unit. It was probably the best unit for me. We're a high volume agency. We would get some days 20 fires a day to work on. So you had to work fast and be efficient and write reports very fast. And because the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department has about 9 million people in its jurisdiction, we got a lot of fatal fires. Everybody gets fatal fires. So you got to work on those once or twice a week, all the time, every week for 21 years. And so you got pretty good at looking at fatal fire scenes. So somehow, as my career went on, I spent 21 years in the arson bomb unit. I gravitated to to two very niche fields within it. One was fatal fires. I like going to the fatal fires. And the second one was serial arsonists. And I've probably investigated more serial arsonists than anybody in the US. I worked on 60 cases myself and helped other investigators on another 70 different serial arsonists. So even in retirement, I still assist agencies with serial arson cases. It's a very unique crime, very different type of criminal, and I hope we get to talk about them today or some other day. But that is my passion, is the serial arsonist. But there's more work in fire death scenes, so I tend to spend time in both of those.
And obviously, a lot of our viewers are from South Africa. Can you quickly just explain the difference between the LA Sheriff's Department and LAPD? Like, what's the divide? Do you overlap? Because our structure in South Africa is we just have one law enforcement agency that covers the whole country. So, it's quite different in the States. So can you just quickly explain that difference between LAPD and LASD?
Yes, the United States has never wanted or never asked for a nationwide law enforcement agency. That's goes back to our history when we broke away from England in the 1770s. So we do have federal law enforcement agencies, but they don't have local police powers to enforce local laws. They enforce federal laws. So in Los Angeles, which obviously people know Los Angeles is a pretty large city, there's 12 to 13 million people in the greater Los Angeles area. Everybody's familiar with Los Angeles Police Department, a really large, very professional agency. They wear the dark blue uniforms. They've been on a million TV shows. They've been featured on things like Dragnet and Adam 12, if you're familiar with those old TV shows. And they patrol just the city of Los Angeles, which has about 3 to 4 million residents. But like I said, there's 12 million people in the Los Angeles vicinity. So there's actually 82 or 85 cities in Los Angeles County, which is how we break up our states. And most of those cities have 50 to 100,000 people. They can't afford their own police agency. It costs a lot of money to have your own police and fire agency. So they contract out with the county of Los Angeles, which has the sheriff department. So you have the city of Los Angeles, and then completely surrounding it is the county of Los Angeles. So our agency, my agency, the LA Sheriff's, patrols all the areas that LAPD does not patrol, basically. And what's unique, if you've ever been here, is our climate is a lot like South Africa, coastal region. We have the coast, we have mountains that actually get snow on them in Los Angeles County. And then we have the warm beaches, and then we have inner city, and we have desert areas. So we have everything. And it's a very large county, and there's a lot of traffic. So the sheriff department has 21 or 22 helicopters just to move people around fast. So because of the traffic issues and things like that. So it's a very large agency. LAPD and LA sheriffs are both almost the exact same size agency and very similar, other than our agency wears tan uniforms and their agency wears blue. That's as simple as I can make it. They're both very modern.
No, thanks.
They're both very modern. They're very busy. We bump into each other every day. Our jurisdictions are right alongside of each other. And so very similar agencies.
And in fact, on the homicide course, there were a lot of LAPD homicide detectives who were attending that particular course run by the sheriff's department.
Yes, I think that that homicide course is jointly owned by the sheriffs and LAPD. And their two homicide units are two of the most famous in the world. They have extremely professional, extremely high clearance rates. And they do a lot of people come to Los Angeles from other parts of the world, as you did, and other parts of the United States just to attend the homicide training there. They're very modern, very up to date, really high end homicide units, both of them. Very good.
And of course, I think the O.J. Simpson case was dealt with by LA sheriffs.
No, it's LAPD, LA Police Department.
Oh, was it LAPD? Oh, okay, my mistake.
Yes.
My mistake.
Yes. So, in my business, because I specialized in fire death, the back half of my career, I worked with the homicide investigators every other day. So, because they don't really know anything about fire. So they would let me run the fire scene investigation if it was a murder case, and they would just kind of just stand around and watch me work and add my reports and information to their overall case. So it's a very close relationship with them. And it gets very complicated because I already said there's two large policing agencies. There's also two large firefighting agencies in the same areas. And so that's LA City Fire Department and LA County Fire Department, two giant modern fire agencies. And this gets really complicated on fire death scenes when you have all these agencies that show up. They're not sure at the start who belongs to and who's in charge. So you've been to enough crime scenes, you know that there's probably a little bit of arguing and posturing amongst the senior detectives to figure out who's in charge.
Is that posturing usually to see if you can give the case away or if you can keep the case?
Well, some agencies don't want cases. They like to give them away. Other agencies like mine and LAPD are very aggressive. We like to take the case.
Okay.
And it's funny.
Does continue?
Go ahead. If I work
and does LAPD have its own? Yeah.
Okay, so your question is going to be, does LAPD have its own arson unit?
Mm.
They do not. They have arson investigators from the fire department that assist them. They have their own investigators on their major crimes unit that works with them. So it's kind of an odd relationship. In the United States and in most of the world, arson investigation is done primarily by fire departments, not in Los Angeles. We do it differently. Several of the large sheriff departments in California are the arson investigators. That's not the norm throughout the US and Canada. And I don't think it's the norm in the UK either. I think there's fire departments are the arson investigators. We do it differently. It seems to work out good for us.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I just kind of feel that I would want the benefits of having an experienced detective who's then trained in the arson part seems to make much, I don't know, just seems to be a logical one for me. But as you say, not many people in the world do it that way necessarily.
Well, that's a great argument. And this comes up all the time because I work all the way across the United States. So I've dealt with 250 different departments. Usually, most departments, it's a firefighter assigned to do the fire scene. And then if he believes there's a crime, he kicks it over or hands it over to the police department who know nothing about fires. I personally do not like that system, but that is the norm through much of the world because, as you just said, I believe this. Maybe it's because my unit does this. I had to have many years as an investigator before I could even go to the arson bomb unit. They won't take you to that unit unless you have 5 years or more as an investigator so that you learn how to do investigations. And this is where I find that it's unfair to most fire departments. They'll have a fire officer who spent 10 years putting out fires. They're exceptionally good at putting out fires and rescuing people. And then that person gets assigned or promoted to the arson investigation unit. They give them literally a 2-week course on how to be a detective and then how to learn about arson. And just because a firefighter puts out fires for 10 years does not mean they know anything about how the fire started. So that's one of the problems in the arson industry right from the start. And then they hand one of the most complicated crime scenes in the world to an investigator who has no investigative training other than 2 weeks in a school. And I think it's really unfair. And that is the crux of why the arsons never get solved. Solve rate for arsons in the United States is deplorable. Always has been, and it always will be unless we change how we do business. It's the average solve rate is under 2%. Even the worst homicide units have a 40% solve rate. And part of that,
I won't tell you what ours is over here in South Africa.
Well, certain areas, I understand that the solve rates have really, really declined because of a lot of issues. But it's like I said, people have always believed, well, they said, well, it's arson, so the crime scenes are harder and fire destroys all the evidence. And actually, that's not true. It's not true at all. The evidence is there. It just does not look like what it used to look like. It's there, and you have to be really well trained to find it and have to put in a lot of labor, a lot of work. So the old myths that have still pervasive is that it's all burned, everything's burned up. It's not. It's there. So we can find it if we look hard enough. Second of all, that's one problem. The second problem is that the fire chiefs in general do not put much emphasis on arson investigation. And I know they get mad when I say that, but I've been saying it for 20 years. And all the investigators say, you're right. I don't blame the investigators. I blame the fire chiefs of the world. They don't put money into fire investigation. They don't like it. They don't want it. They'd rather that the police did it. I know that because hundreds of them have told me this. They want firefighters to be firefighters, and that's it. and they want the police to do the police stuff. And they certainly don't want firefighters carrying guns and arresting people. So consequently, historically in the US, the fire chiefs have not wanted their people to go to training. They don't spend much money on it. And it's a very, as you know, Gerard, it's an extremely technical investigation, very difficult.
Yeah.
Just the fire scene itself, let alone the criminal investigation that follows.
Yeah.
So that's one of the biggest problems that's always been in the arson industry. And even if you don't believe me, look at the books from the 1950s and 60s. They talk about that very problem, and it's never changed about in the arson industry. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox on that.
So let's start at the beginning. Why do, okay, but we're going to put aside the sort of accidental stuff primarily and focus on intentional, starting of fires. Why do people start fires? What's the general reasons?
The FBI has created a list of motives, of general motives. There's hundreds of motives. So you're not going to know the motive for why somebody does it until you actually do the investigation. And even then you might not know until you maybe sit down with an interview with the fire starter, why they did it. And if they're honest with you, and sometimes they are, they'll tell you. But it's a combination of understanding the fire scene and the dynamics of what happened at the fire scene, and then matching that with the evidence that's found when maybe you make an arrest. But to answer your question, the two main reasons why people set arson fires, the top two reasons are: one, they're really, 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 really mad at somebody. So it's anger and hate and revenge. That's the number one reason: anger, hate, revenge. And those tend to be very similar in nature to most murders. It's a personal crime. It's somebody you know. So the victims almost always know the suspect. And it's done with a lot of passion and hatred and anger. Those are the easiest ones to solve, by the way. The people that tend to do those tend not to plan them out. They react violently. They maybe precede the event with a lot of threats, harassing text messages or phone calls. Breaking of windows is a very common thing that precedes fires. Vandalism to personal property, like slashing the tires of a vehicle, breaking its windows, spray painting something. Those and sometimes even domestic violence. All those things tend to precede revenge arson attacks. So, most of the people in my business agree that revenge and hate or anger motivated arsons are about 40% of all the arsons. So almost half. Another 40% is profit. Somebody wants to make money off a fire event. And so that's 80% of all your arsons are very simple. They're either somebody's really mad at somebody, or somebody's trying to use fire as a tool to make money. And I told you that the easiest ones to solve are the revenge fires. They're very obvious in most cases. And there's a lot of other evidence associated with before the event, after the event, taunting text messages, things like that. And sometimes the offender just sits there and waits for the police to come and arrest them because they're so upset they don't care. They're the easiest ones to solve. Then the fraud-related ones or the profit-related fires, they're the hardest ones to solve. Sometimes they fool us. We don't even recognize them as an arson event, and we write them up as an accidental event if they are skilled at fooling us. And sometimes they mislead us, so they stage a crime scene to make it something else. And that's something that I look at, where you maybe stage an event as a hate crime, but actually it's a fraud case. And there's tricks to the trade that arson investigators really look at to say, is this really a hate crime, or is this a fraud event, or is there something else going on here? Just because somebody spray painted something on a church does not necessarily make it a hate crime. It could very well be a staged event to hide theft inside of the church, something like that. So those are your two, those take up 80% of all arson attacks. The other less common reasons for arson are crime concealment. So in your business and in mine, where there's death involved, you'll have fire. If there's fire involved, it's generally most often to cover up after a murder. Somebody's been killed, and now their body, the place is either burned or the body's been removed and disposed of and burned at a disposal site. All of those have their unique characteristics and traits that people like you and I look for. I know you showed me some from South Africa, various traits at body dump sites. And I've written whole chapters about body dumps, the characteristics of those. So that's another, it's not a super common thing, but it's becoming more common as offenders understand forensics. They know that the police are going to get DNA and things like that off of a body, or off of a murder scene. So they sometimes will burn the murder scene, or they'll burn the body, or attempt to. The nice part is, this is the beauty of it, and a lot of people don't understand this. The more steps they take to destroy the evidence, the more evidence they leave us. And we solve the vast majority of our body dumps. And a body dump, again, is a body disposed of. Usually in Los Angeles, a body dump is characterized by somebody killed in the city, so in a very populated area, and then driven in a vehicle out to a remote area in the mountains or the desert and burned. We solve almost every one of those pretty quickly in most cases, because the more they use to dispose of the body, the more evidence they leave us to catch them. So it's kind of and most people don't know how to set a fire in modern times, so they're not very good at it. So they leave us tons and tons of evidence, and I work on those all the time, and I really enjoy working on those because of all the stuff that's left at the scene. So that's a crime concealment motive, and then you have my other favorite thing, which is not super common, is a serial arsonist. And those are people who set fire for emotional based reasons. And there's 35 to 40 different subtypes of serial arson alone. So one of the things I deal with in court is going through all the myths and all the wrong information that people have about serial arson. And I have to educate the judges, I have to educate the attorneys, and even the defense experts, because usually they'll bring in psychologists or psychiatrists as a defense expert. And the overwhelming majority in that profession have no experience or no formal training in serial arson. So they're easily dealt with in most cases, but they believe in old myths from the 1940s and 50s, which just aren't true. There's so many different types of serial arsonists. It would take forever to talk about them. Anyway, that's another motive for emotionally based fire setting, is what most serial arsonists do. We can talk about them again. That's its own subject. And then there's some fewer other reasons to set fires. So some vandalism reasons. Juvenile fire setting is got its own category, and it depends on the age of the offender. But so there's a lot of reasons to set a fire, and even under the major reasons, there's a bunch of sub headings to set fires. But the main two are anger, revenge, and profit. Those are the two main subtypes.
And you once, I recall from your training a couple of years ago, you said that actually killing someone with fire is actually not a very common thing. Covering it up is perhaps more common. So what are the examples of like when people actually use fire as the murder weapon?
That's a great question. I'm glad you brought it up, because I forgot to mention it. Majority of people that are actually killed by fire are actually non-intended victims. It is extraordinarily difficult to murder somebody by fire. Fire, in most cases, you cannot aim. It's a slow-moving weapon. Unless these people are tied up, bound up, somehow unconscious, it is extremely difficult to murder somebody by fire. What you tend to get when someone's murdered by fire is an unintended victim, like a firefighter arriving to an arson scene, and they die while trying to extinguish the fire. That's one scenario. Another more common scenario is, say you have an apartment building with 20 apartments in it, and a couple is having a domestic fight in one of the apartments, and it goes physical, and at some point one of the two lights a fire, either trying to burn the clothing of the other or something in the apartment. Those two see the fire and they leave. They go outside and maybe they continue their fight, maybe they don't. And anybody that's able and ambulatory leaves as well if they're warned. And you tend to get your elderly people or your people that are non-ambulatory that die in those fires. And they're not even involved. They just didn't hear the alarm or were not cognizant of the fire burning, and they died due to smoke or poison gases from the fire. And that is a common thing. They're unintended victims, and they just died because they were unable to escape a fire that somebody else set.
And I'm curious, just from a legal point of view, let's say a person sets fire to a building for insurance purposes, it's abandoned, the firefighter arrives, and in the process of putting out the fire, the firefighter dies for whatever reasons, but as a result of the fire. Does that arsonist get charged with murder for that firefighter's death?
In most places in the United States, we have a law called the felony murder rule. And it's changing a little bit, but what that means is if you are involved in a violent felony and somebody dies, whether you intended for them to die or not, as a result of your actions, you're going to be prosecuted for felony murder. And
Okay.
it's not like premeditated murder, so it's a step down. But fire is one of those things where it happens, where a firefighter dies in the line of duty. So that felony murder rule exists in most states in the United States, and they're changing it now because it was used quite a bit in gang-related shootings, and they're having a problem with that here with the law. So, but it still holds true for most arson cases that if you set an arson fire for fraud, you have no intention to hurt anybody, you can be charged with murder in the United States. It's called felony murder. If you say that there's some homeless people living in this building and you're aware of that, you could actually be charged with premeditated murder. So it depends on the exact circumstances of the event. And those do happen quite a bit.
Yeah, I would actually, now that I think about it, in South Africa, I hear you. If you set fire to what you think is an abandoned building, but there's people inside, I think straight out murder in South Africa. But I think even if you set fire to a completely abandoned building and the firefighter responded, because we'd use the sort of principle of you should have foreseen that if you set fire to a building, people are going to respond to put it out and someone could die. And if you went ahead anyway and did it, you would probably still be able to charge the person with murder in South Africa also. It's just an interesting thought that popped up as I was thinking about
No,
that.
it's a really good question. I was just involved in a case 2 years ago that ended up being the case of the year internationally for some awards through the arson groups. And it was a adult special needs offender, and he had lit a fire because he was trying to prove that he was a hero. He had been lighting a series of fires to prove he was a hero. And then he was rescuing people, and it was usually in elderly neighborhoods where the most of the victims whose houses he lit on fire were over 75 years old. And he lit one of his final fires that he lit it, and the elderly person was outside of his home. He was 85 years old, and that person ran into his home to retrieve something, and he died. And so the offender, even though he was special needs, he was high functioning, special needs, autistic. He could drive a vehicle and he held jobs. He had set, I think, total of 23 fires in 4 U.S. states. So I was brought in to link him to all his other fires, if that was possible. And it was one of those. His final fire was the one that killed somebody. And even though he was a special needs person, he actually fooled on all his previous fires. He fooled investigators on, I think, 20 of his 23 fires. They called all of them accidents. And that can happen in our business. And many of them were very well trained investigators. They just don't see they don't see evil. They do their investigations, and they just can't sometimes believe that somebody actually purposely set these fires. Most of the victims were elderly. They did not have the ability to move fast. But that was a very unique case. I didn't investigate any of the fire scenes. I was brought in as kind of what you do. I was brought in as a case analyst profiler to tie his 20-some fires together. But in doing that, I was actually found multiple burglaries that he had committed as well, break-ins. And I used those as part of my profile because the actions were nearly identical. And he had pre-offense behavior and post-offense behavior that was ritualistic in nature, meaning he did the same things over and over and over and over again. And it followed him through 4 different U.S. states. And it was a really cool case to work. And this person ended up being in custody, basically in a mental health place, which is where he needed to be. But anyway, this is sort of a short story of a very complex case.
Now, just for the viewers, we are going to have another episode where we delve from start to finish into a really in-depth serial arson case. So if people are wondering we want to hear about cases, we're going to definitely have a follow-up, really just like an hour, just talking about one serial arson case for people who really want to get that ins and outs. So, but I'm just curious. I mean, I remember that when I did your training, there just seem to be so many misconceptions about fire and how it works. And as a result of that, a lot of stupid mistakes made by people trying to set fires. I mean, are there any of those that you want to just touch on, either just for educational purposes about fire for people who are watching?
Yes. So one of the things is I work in a city mostly, but we are surrounded by mountains and deserts and forests and things like that. Most people in modern areas that live in cities now do not know how to set a fire, like maybe our great grandparents did back in the pioneer days. They could set a fire with 2 twigs. And unless you practice these survival shows, most people have a very hard time setting fire. So what they tend to do is everybody in the world knows that petrol or gasoline will start a fire. And that is one thing that's universal that everybody knows. And so they tend to bring that to a scene. So just the fact that they've organized and collected materials to set a fire is interesting to me. And then they bring it, and most people are of the opinion, well, if a cup of petrol or gasoline will start this fire, I'll bet a gallon or a liter would do it even better. And what they tend to do is bring too much, which is helpful for the investigator because then we find it in the fire scene. And even after the largest fire, we can locate petrol or gasoline in a fire scene. It's very, very aromatic. We can find it on our detectors. Our dogs can find it, things like that. Most people tend to overdo it. And when they do that, they don't understand the principles of gasoline or petrol. It is not designed to be used to set fires. It is designed to be used to create explosions. And people don't understand that. And people say, well, hold on, I put it in my car. Right. When you put gasoline in your car's engine has a series of explosions. That's how combustion engines work. The fuel goes in, air is pushed into the fuel, so it's added air, and then it's compressed by the pistons in the engine. So now it's under pressure, and then it's ignited and it explodes. That's how gasoline works in an engine. It works the same way outside, only it's more dangerous because now it's very aerated by all the air. And we have arsonists that on occasion, and it's often, if they pour fuel in a scene, they quite often light themselves on fire inadvertently because there's those flammable, explosive gasoline vapors are in the air. They get on their clothes. And even if they set the container down and wait a few minutes and strike a match or strike a lighter, poof, they're on fire. And whatever they're trying to burn is on fire. So on occasions, we find our arsonists laying right next into our fire scene. They've killed themselves or they run away on fire, and we'll find them in the hospital or the burn ward, or they've come up with injuries from their fire. And so that is one of the myths is that, it's safe to do this stuff. Most people that use flammable liquids to light fires, it's an extraordinarily difficult thing to do. And anyway, the other thing, this comes up more in fire death cases than any other thing, is things move in fires. Items in a room move a little bit. Certainly very light items move. But what people don't understand is human bodies move in a fire 100% of the time. And what you see at the end of the fire is not what that person, was not the position that body was in when the fire started. Every single time the body moves in a fire. So new investigators or homicide detectives who are not used to seeing fire death victims, they don't understand that unless they have the training, and they get bad data from that scene by misinterpreting what they're seeing. And so you really need, even your arson investigators, if they don't have fire death training, they need to go. They need to get that training because what they're seeing at the end of the fire has been changed dramatically by the fire itself. And add to that the fire department, the fire suppression team that comes in there and they put high pressure hoses, lots of water. Everything they do is damaging the scene and moving the body even more or damaging it. So you have that going on. And it happens 100% of the time, and we can't stop that. And firefighters, if they don't see bodies in a structure, they step on them sometimes. That happens. And you'll see a burnt body with a big crushed skull from a firefighter's boot. And because the firefighter did not see the body in there. And so these things happen, and you have to interpret all this damage. The other thing that I teach in all my classes about fire death scenes is, unless it's in a vehicle, people always come to the fire death scene and change it before the fire department even gets there. And that is a huge thing. Citizen rescuers go to every fire scene. They're the ones that call the fire department and the police, and they change things. They break in windows, they throw water into it, they run garden hoses, carry in fire extinguishers, and they change things. They kick in doors. And you think when you come an hour later that it's the arsonist who did this, and it's actually citizen rescuers. And if you're not aware that that happens virtually every time, except on car fires, nobody wants to go near a car fire. But on structure fires, always, citizens always come and do rescue. And then police come and do rescue and kick in doors and break windows. They think they're helping. And then the investigators are left to wonder when they get there an hour later, what the heck happened here? We don't know what happened. There's boot marks on everything. And then you realize it's the firefighters or the citizens' boots or something. Unless you do crime scene interviews and canvass the neighborhood, knock on doors, You're not going to know who did what. And it's very, very confusing. And when you go to court, of course, defense attorneys will try and blame it on some mythical arsonist instead of the actual defendant. And so if you don't do really good scene work, you're going to be in a lot of trouble in court. So that's what I teach at a lot of my training to new investigators, that there's a lot that goes on at these scenes that you're not aware of. The fire's moving things, the fire department's moving things, and citizen rescuers are changing the scene before you even get there. So it's difficult scenes to do.
So on episodes like tonight, I get to sit back a little bit and enjoy the pros of talking it out. But I'm just curious to know, when you arrive on a scene, then what are the initial things that you will typically do, and what are the most important things to ascertain right up front?
All right, this is sort of a joke, but I'm not. What I always tell new homicide detectives when they go to these scenes, because they're going to be there before the arson investigator, I said, whatever the fire chief tells you, he's probably wrong. Now that's a little unfair, but I say that tongue in cheek, because the fire chiefs tend to run scenes. They're very good at what they do: fighting fire, conducting rescue, and then they have a preliminary task to do a walkthrough and to maybe sort of try and figure out what happened at this scene. And that's very unfair to them, because it takes years to be a fire investigator. And fire chiefs, just by putting out fires, are not fire investigators. But it's a sort of a task that they're assigned. And they might have an 8-hour training in that. It takes years. It takes several years. And so we have a common fire around the holidays in the United States, or a lot of places, a Christmas tree fire. People that still use live Christmas trees. And will arrive at a scene, and when you get holiday fires, there tend to be mass casualty events, 3 to 5 to 8 people from the same family, because you have visitors over and they're staying. There's a lot of factors at play here. And when we arrive, the fire chief the first person we talk to is the person in charge of the scene, the fire chief. And they'll come up and they'll say, it's a Christmas tree fire, so therefore it's an accident. And that starts a little bit of an argument. That's a very common thing. We say, well, hold on, chief, the Christmas tree is a piece of fuel. And arson investigators are weirdos. Everything to us is a piece of fuel. There's two things. It's either an ignition source or it's a piece of fuel. A human body is a piece of fuel to us in a fire scene. A Christmas tree cannot light itself on fire, so therefore it's a piece of fuel. And a dried Christmas tree is a really good piece of fuel. It's as good as gasoline, but it's still fuel. So it will not light itself on fire, no matter how dry it is. So if they say, well, it's a Christmas tree fire, our answer is, okay, thank you. And then we start our investigation, because we know what he told us is not factual. That's probably the main fuel that was ignited, and it did a lot of damage. Now we have to try and figure out what ignited the Christmas tree. The answers will be in the scene, and hopefully we can find them. And so that's one of our first things, is we talk to the fire department. And I know the scientists in our business believe that we're biasing our investigation by doing that. There was a movement a few years ago, thank God it's died, saying you don't need to talk to anybody. The scene speaks for itself. And that is so unrealistic. It's like having a pathologist not want to know the conditions the body was found in before he conducts an autopsy. That's ridiculous. That's silly on its face. But there was a movement 15 or 20 years ago for people not to tell the forensic people anything. And you say, well, you know, that's unfair to them. They don't know the conditions. They don't know that maybe that body was underwater after the fire because it was in the basement of a property and the fire department filled it up full of water. And so, you know, the body's collected and brought, and some poor pathologist thinks the body was in a fire and it's got water inside of it. And they're trying to figure that out, going, how did this happen? So we do talk to the fire chiefs. We want to know the scene conditions, but they are not the most important person to talk to. So historically, in all the books about fire investigation, is when you get there, the most important person to talk to is the first arriving fire captain or officer. And now we've stopped doing that. That is not true, because you have to understand somebody else was there first. That's who called the fire department. They may not be a professional, but there could be just a citizen passing by, but they will be able to tell you what was going on way before the fire department got there. And in Los Angeles, on their best day, the fire department takes about 8 minutes to get to a fire. So that's 8 minutes of destruction and damage, and the fire moving from one part of the structure to another. And so the first fire officer is not the best witness. He's a great witness. They're a great witness, but they're not the best. The best is the first person who saw or heard the event. And then we can maybe start a timeline. So to answer I know I spent 5 minutes trying to answer your question. We want to first talk to who reported the fire. That's the first person. And then ask them, are you the first person to see it, or did somebody else tell you about it? We want to go backwards and see if we can find the very first person who noticed the fire. And that doesn't mean that's when the fire started. That fire could have been burning for 3 hours prior to that. So there's, fires can burn inside of buildings with nobody knowing for a long time. They're just smoldering around in a building. So we have to try and do that. Second of all, we do want to speak to the fire officer. We want to know what tactics they used, because their tactics that they use actually makes fire move through a building and may fool us in our investigation. So we'll ask them about that. And you've seen probably on TV the firefighters cutting holes in roofs and maybe cutting a hole in a wall or something. They're doing that to effectively and safely fight a fire. They do not want to enter a building, a big building like a warehouse that's full of smoke. That's disaster waiting to happen. So what they'll try and do is put firefighters on the roof of that to cut a hole. There's a name for it, but it's basically to let the smoke and the fire gases out through the roof so that they can safely enter the building from down below. And it's a safety and firefighting tactic, but that's going to change the way the fire burns in the building too. So we know that. So that's why we asked them what they do, how they do it. And then that helps us with our investigation. And then the first thing, and then they're going to walk us, the fire chief is going to walk us into where he thinks the fire may have started. We'll note that down, but we don't take that as fact. We then stop. As soon as we've done that, we stop. We start to document the scene and conduct our investigation as if we've never spoken to the fire chief. We document it with photos and video all the way around it, the outside if it's a structure, and then slowly work our way into the inside. And it's just observing burn patterns. We're observing where fire left the building. Those we call ventilation patterns, because it's very important. The people think the most damage is where the fire started. That's not always true. The most damage is where the air is coming in. And so if the fire starts on one side of a building and the only open window is on the other side of the building, most of the damage will be where the open window is, and it will completely fool investigators. I don't want to get too much into fire science because it's super technical, but it's easy to get fooled by ventilation patterns because you see this big volume of flame coming out of where there's an open window, and everybody goes, there's where the fire started. And that it may not even be in that side of the building. It may be completely on the other side of the building. So you have to go through a lot of training. So a good fire investigator goes to training, goes to work on scenes, goes back to training, goes to work on scenes, goes back to training. And throughout your career, you have to continuously go to fire training because of all the science and dynamics that are involved. Yeah. And it is an extraordinarily difficult field. I do bomb investigations and explosion investigations too. They're much easier. Really they're similar, but much easier than a fire investigation. Fire investigation is so technical.
Why is that? And where's the overlap there with regards to, you know, what a fire will do as opposed to a bomb?
Well, the bomb does the same thing that a fire does, except it doesn't burn it in most cases. Many bombings, there's no fire event with it, but it's the same sort of process without all the fire damage. So that's why fire scenes are more difficult. You have to interpret the damage and realize, is this damage caused by the fire? Is this damage caused by the fire department? And that's one big problem. And then the other thing is the fire dynamics and the fire science, which is incredibly difficult to understand what happens to things in fires and how does fire move through a building. You know, does it you know, most people do not understand how fire moves through a building or how smoke changes things. So like I said, that's a super technical thing, but that is one of the things we have to understand.
Maybe that's a good point then to start to introduce maybe, you know, the training that you guys did down here in South Africa. We can look at some of the images that we prepared for the discussion here as well. I imagine that the training is very practical. I mean, there's the theory part, but is it predominantly, you know, having to kind of get stuck in and burn things and see how things work and how fire moves? Is it kind of a lot of practical when it comes to the training side of things?
Yes, that's a great question. A friend of mine coined the phrase "we burn to learn" here, and every fire training school should have live burns in it, because and guys like me that have been doing it for 27, 28 years, I still go to dozens and dozens of training burns a year. When you watch things burns, then you understand it. Then you understand how smoke flows through a building. You understand how heat moves through a building or a car or something like that. You understand what it does to a human body if you burn things. We have a unique school here in California where I'm at and that I've been part of in the past where we burn human cadavers. And now I believe there's 2 more schools in the US like it. But for years, they've been using cases, some of them were mine, where they take human medical cadavers and burn them in certain situations. And sometimes they try and recreate crimes. It's probably the best training I've been training all over the world. It's the best training is when you watch these fire death schools conduct this training. And they do it in vehicles, they do it in structures, they do it outside. They try and replicate all kinds of situations. It's very expensive because it costs a lot to do that. And when we do that, we have a lot of scientists around. They're monitoring the heat, they're monitoring the bodies. We have a bunch of pathologists that are there monitoring it. And the students are people like us. They're arson investigators, they're homicide investigators, they're coroners, pathologist people, and they don't get to see the body burn. We film that. They just get brought out to a scene and said, "Okay, you have a burned body in the back of this car. Start to investigate it." And we teach them how to conduct scene investigations properly, and then what the fire effects are on the body, and that is the most important part of that training. But some of the video you have is from some similar training we did in South Africa quite a few years ago now with Gerard. We burned about 4 vehicles and then a couple of structures. And the hardest part about this training is to do it safely without starting a major fire. So you have to have a lot of coordination. And I live in California, which is very dry and hot, and it's very difficult for us to do outdoor burns anymore. Everybody's terrified of us causing a large brush fire. But we got away with it there in South Africa, and you probably have some clips or some footage of some of what we are doing. We don't burn things just to light a big fire and everybody laughs and dances around it. That's not the purpose of it. Actually, small fires are what you learn from. And there's certain fire agencies, investigation agencies in the world that only go to big fires. And I think that's terrible. their investigators are just do giant fires or fires where there's 10 people deceased. It's overwhelming, that kind of damage and that kind of work. You need to see small fires. You need to see hundreds of them. We don't consider, in my unit, we don't consider somebody trained until they've seen 200 fires, investigated them, and wrote a report on them. That's when we consider them trained. So I don't consider most people qualified for court unless they have 200 to 500 fires. And then, even then, they need more training. So I know a lot of people will disagree with me because they don't get that many fires, because they only go to big fires. But it's repetition. It's like anything else. The more you repeat training and activity, you get better and better and better. And then I think Gerard mentioned it before. The proof of whether you're good or not is not what certificates you hold, and it's not what training you go to. It's going to a courtroom and explaining this in human terms to civilians and attorneys and judges. And that is the mark of whether you know your job or you don't. Court makes you better. You're going to get challenged. You better know your business. And I say that because I know that there, in the arson field, there's a lot of people teaching it that have never been to court. I find that shocking. They don't know what court's all about. They're not going to know the process. They're not going to know what they're going to get questioned on. And so, but there's some of the instructors out there, and quite a few of them don't have courtroom experience. Okay. And that's where that old phrase, where the rubber meets the road. You will know if you are any good at your craft, if you can survive civil court or criminal court. It doesn't matter. They're both, you're up there swearing that what you're saying is the truth. And that is where it all comes to a head.
Okay. Maybe we can take a look at some of the images here. You guys can talk them through us. We'll start off with Gerard heading over to stateside here. So here we go. Gerard, we're looking smart.
Yeah, so that's the course, the LA Sheriff's course. That's my old police laptop there with the stickers on the lid. I think the two guys on the right, the one guy was Rolando. He was from LAPD homicide unit, and the guys on the left, I think, were visiting from Marietta Police Department. And that's, as I said, where I first encountered Ed. And I thought, when I get back, I'm going to tell a few people about this guy. And I told, I think, Leonie Russ, who worked at the Victim Identification Center, and obviously, from our side, trying to get and eventually brought Ed out. So yeah, so that's I think it's one of the courses that I'm most proud of, that certificate. To have been had that opportunity to do that course.
We'll come back to Ed's books. Let's carry, and then we'll talk about those in a little while.
So this is my old unit. This was a course we did with Ed in Pretoria. You recognize in the back of the right, Elmarie, who's still there. Suzette with the blonde hair, who was with us but left. Marius Hubert, who often gets mentioned and watches our show. That's him on the top left-hand side there.
One of our regular commenters. Good evening, Marius.
He stays active. I see him online.
Yeah, he's
great.
One of our regulars.
Two other guys with the red stripes on the shoulders were guys who were from I think the facial identification unit, and some people from the victim identification unit. So it's nice. We always try to mix up and bring a selection of people from not just our unit but other units on this. And this was more the sort of understand the basics and a little bit of the profiling side of it. This wasn't an arson investigation course.
Did you arrange for this to happen, Gerard?
So at that point in time, we had a lot of money available for training.
Okay.
So I was kind of able to kind of pick and choose who I'd like, and then say to SAPS, I want this course, I want that course. These are the potential trainers who I would accept as trainers. And then usually you have to give, I think, 3 names of overseas speakers, and then one would come out. And there's me and Yanni, that many of you have heard about on the show before, that very same training Yanni. Course. And then I think so there's again just some of the exercises we're doing.
Over how long did you do this? Over how long did you do the training?
This was a 40-hour, basically one full week of training for us, if I recall, because we wouldn't see the value in bringing someone out from overseas for a 2-day course. So basically, it was always going to be at least a 5-day course like, although the ballistics course I did, that was a 2 or 3 week course. This was a 1 week course.
And doubled up as you can throw a wedding reception in there if you need to as well.
Absolutely.
So, Ed,
And set it on fire.
Ed, just to you, the opportunity for you to come down to South Africa and meet the guys here, and to meet Gerard and the team, and to interact with South Africans on South African cases here. What were some of your kind of key takeouts? What were some of the things that you enjoyed the most? Some of the things that really stood out for you from an educational point of view that that you might not have come across stateside?
Well, the first thing, it's funny that you mentioned that looks like a wedding venue that we were at. It had a thatched roof, which was surprising to me. And I've never been to Southern Africa. I've been up to the Middle East areas, and all I could think of is there going to be a cobra that comes out of that ceiling or something like that? I watched too many shows on TV, apparently. But no, I wasn't used to a national police force. I'd never seen that before. That was the first one I'd run into, and I've run into several others since then. I've been to train people in China and other places that had national police forces, and so that was very unique. And the people that were there, you guys, your group is what I would consider similar to the American FBI for that particular specialty. The VIC, the Victims Identification Center, was very similar to what the American FBI has, and very high-end group of very specialized, highly educated people, and that was very, very fun for me to work with. I have worked with the FBI profilers on a couple of occasions, but it's pretty rare for us to do that. Los Angeles doesn't have a lot of specialty. Well, we have every other specialty, but we don't use profiling as such like that. There are 1 or 2 people in every agency, but not whole units like that. So I was fascinated by that and really impressed by the level that they are at. I wish I could go back and do that same course again, because I've greatly increased my knowledge and training in that particular analysis, profiling, investigative psychology, as Gerard knows. And I look at things completely different than I did 10 years ago.
Okay.
And I look at more and more crime scenes. I've looked at tens of thousands of crime scenes now, and I like doing it. It's just a hobby now more than anything. People send them to me every day, and I can see things based just on training and getting that training there as well, because they train me as much as I provided a little bit of training to them. I see things better, and I see things that the average investigator does not see. And that's just through a combination of training and just repetition.
Are there advances in technology, kind of applying things like, I'm sure that the AI revolution is being applied to your trade? Are there things that are speeding up that learning curve for young people coming into the profession or coming into your area of expertise?
It is, and it's great. I'll sound like my grandfather when I answer this thing. It's coming, and it's all good for the most part, but it's coming at the expense of people forgetting basic police work. And I don't care who you are or what you are, the number one way to solve crimes is by doing a neighborhood canvass, which means knocking on doors. That's an old police term. And it is still the single best way. And then second of all, you can't even start that until you've fully processed your crime scene. So to answer your question, Paul, we have drones, we have dogs, we have AI, we have all these toys now, computer analysis, these cameras that the things they call the total stations, where they map an entire crime scene. They're phenomenal. They're wonderful. They're actually better to present things in court than we've ever been able to do. But people that are really skilled at that seem to have walked away from their basic skills, which is knocking on doors. And do you guys know the TV show Bosch?
Bosh.
No. It's a modern TV show called Bosch. All right. It's about an LAPD homicide detective. It's actually an exceptionally good show. I don't watch police shows much, but it's BOSCH, and phenomenally good show. And he has something on his desk, and the show stole it from either LAPD or LA sheriffs. They always argue who invented it. It's a slogan. It says, "Get off your ass and knock on doors." And it's a sign that was in the sheriff's homicide unit before I got into the business in 1987. And in LAPD has the same sign, or they have the initials. It's "Get off your ass and go knock on doors." It means when in doubt, if there's a slow part of your case, go back out and talk to people. People will tell you stuff. Even people who don't like you will tell you stuff. Even if they lie to you, they told you something. And that is information, that is data, and that is collecting data, which is what we're using toys a lot, and I like them, but you need to, before you resort to the toys, you need to do old-fashioned police work, which is do the scene, pull every bit of forensics you can possibly pull out of the crime scene, and then using a detective or a interested patrol officer, go knock on every door within a mile. You'll be surprised what you will learn.
Yeah,
And
because I guess.
canvassing.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Canvassing now includes, of course, video. Of course, everybody uses video now, and you're not going to know if there's video there unless you knock on doors. And we can see the obvious places where there's video, but knock on doors, people will tell you stuff, and it's something you did not know, and it's manpower intensive. It's not that much fun because you might talk to 10 people to just waste your time, but that one person is gold, and that's how crimes are solved and forever will be solved. Yeah. Go ahead. You have another question?
No, I was just going to say, just because it seems that, it's the more difficult place to apply technology is to where your two skill sets intersect, the psychology of it and the actual act of it. How important is building a profile, and how successful can putting a profile together on a case be? I mean, All right, so listen to this. Glad you asked me that, because I've been reborn, I guess. I went to I've gone to so many training classes. I went to one about 2 months ago with extremely high-end FBI phone analysts, cellular telephone analysts. And besides the fact, that they can track people and all this stuff, of course, modern police work is cell phones and social media. Well, profiling exists in both of those. And every day, if you were to profile me, if you're really interested in what I do, you'll know that at this time of day, I'm watching the sports scores on this particular web feed. At this time of day, I'm at the gym and my heart rate monitor's watching me try and ride a bike or treadmill or something. So that is now a personal profile, and that is gold. And the way that really skilled people are doing is they'll take behavioral profiles from the crime scene. They'll link them to a person's vehicle, because, your vehicle's tracking, and modern vehicles are tracking you. Then they'll link them to your cell phone and your social media. We don't even have to follow a suspect. We know what he's going to be doing all day, every day. Yeah. And if we're looking for them, the people that really use this stuff the most are people that hunt fugitives. Say the person goes offline and he goes, well, I'm wanted for a murder. I'm just going to go dark digitally. All we have to do is figure out what they were doing for the past year, and we can probably come pretty close to finding that person real quick. Okay, we know that for the past year on his cell phone or on his social media, he was doing this. And we can extrapolate that information to figure out what he's going to be doing. Oh, this is where his girlfriend works. This is where his mother lives.
This is where his son goes to school. Sooner or later, we're going to catch that guy at one of those places. And maybe I'm being a little loose with it, but that is modern profiling mixed with modern technology. And you can do that for missing people. You can do that for dementia patients who are wandering away, and you can find them easier. You can fine tune the search to find these people based on all their past activity. So that's, a really good criminal investigation team is not one person anymore. Nobody's an expert at everything. I'm really good at crime scenes. I'm really good at certain things. I'm horrible at social media. I'm horrible at tracking phones. But if I know an expert that's good, that's going to be on my team. A younger person. I'm old now. A younger person. I need a younger person as well too. So you mix all those together. Now you have a really good 4 or 5 person team that can do this work.
Okay. Gerard, I guys, I thought
Gerard
we could just
nodding his head. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
it's like nodding your head. So I think
it's so true. I mean, what you said earlier about get off your ass and knock on some doors. And I often mention on the show a book that was written in the 1950s by when he retired, was the head South African detective, head of detectives. And he was a detective in the 20s and 30s, or 30s and 40s and 50s, or 20s and 30s and 40s in South Africa. And how just those basic, simple principles, before that, all this fancy technology is what got cases solved. But those are also just as relevant today, no matter how much technology you have. You can have all the technology and all the information at your resources. If you don't have a smart detective to put it all together, it means absolutely nothing. So, I mean, I 100% agree what you're saying with that stuff. It still has to be a person who has that right detective brain and mindset and get off his ass and do his job or her job. Otherwise, it means nothing to have all these fancy pieces of technology.
I don't know if this is a good question, but from a psychological point of view, who is the scariest type of arsonist from your point of view? Who's the?
I wrote a book on.
Who do you worry about the most?
It's the obsessive compulsive ones, and the ones that take the smallest slight, and magnify it in their head and think about it for 10 years. They'll be and I've run into several cases like that, and I've written about them in one of my books. Probably they're the Hollywood version of arsonists. They're the ones that plan and scheme this attack for forever. Now, it's not just arsonists, it's other people who are seeking vengeance, the stalker types and people like that. And Gerard knows these people very well. They're the most dangerous and obsessive bombers. Serial bombers are extremely obsessive and dangerous people. That's all. They just think about revenge and revenge and revenge, and they'll wait 9 years to get it. And so when I say that they take the smallest slight and magnify it, you might cut a person off in traffic. That happens every day. And then this person, and even if you apologize, they'll follow you home or to wherever you work, and they'll wait, and then maybe the next day they'll come and burn your car. That's an inanimate object, but they could just very well do it to your house while you're sleeping. And arson is a crime. When we get people like that, and I've run into several, most serial arsonists are very weak people, physically and in every way. They will not face you. They will not fight you like a predatory street gang member will, but they'll get you when you're sleeping, or they'll get your family, or they'll go after your pets. They'll go after your children, maybe 3 weeks from now, maybe 3 years from now. Those are the worst, and they exist. And when I look at people like that, I look at what they do in their past, and their entire past is obsessive, making molehills into mountains is what we call it. Is just taking a very small incident and magnifying it beyond all reality. And I know Gerard knows these kind of people. He's run into them before because him and I have talked about it. And they'll plan and scheme for years, and you forgot who that person was. And they'll remind you someday. I run into those. There's a couple of those I think, if once he finds out where I live, he'll probably try and burn my house down 10 years from now. But that's just part of the business. But
Yeah.
and those are the people, if you put them in jail or prison, 20 years later, they get out, they still think it's yesterday. They're still mad from 20 years and they don't get better. And
So,
go ahead.
so it's more about the outcome of what they want to do as opposed to the act of it. Do you come across types of personalities who are, who just want to sit back and watch things burn, and and it's not so much about the outcome, that sense of, okay, revenge, or that feeling that they would get from it, or is it? Have you come across those folks who are just fire starters? I don't know, what would you call them, but
Yeah, I have. It's one of the big myths in our business. And I'm happy you haven't used the word pyromaniac yet. We don't use that word in my business. It's not a real word. It's made up by the psychiatric profession,
okay,
and they use it. And even they have grave doubts about what it means and what it is. There are people that I personally have met and talked to that have lit 300 to 500 fires that I know,
sure,
maybe more. And it seems like you would call them a pyromaniac, but pyromania basically means you have an uncontrollable urge to light a fire. These people don't light fires when they're in jail. They don't light them in the courtroom. They don't light them when there's a police officer standing around, so they can control it. So that's not a word we use. I don't believe in that. I have met a lot of people who light a lot of fires. Most of them, when I speak to them, say that they just, it's a stress reliever. That's probably the most common thing, or they're just angry about something and they can light a fire because that's something they can control. And when we get, hopefully you have me on again, we can talk about serial arsonists. There's serial arsonists. They're fully immobile, handicapped, people with quadriplegics that are serial arsonists. There's people that live in hospitals that are serial arsonists. There's lots of special needs serial arsonists. Anybody can be a serial arsonist. It takes practically nothing to light a fire. And that is when I've run into people like that, they all say the same thing. I don't have any control of most things in my life, but I can control this. And so it's something that they can control. If they're not getting their way, if they're in a psychiatric institution and they don't get their cigarettes, they light a fire. And that is actually a pretty common scenario. And so it's something that they know that will upset somebody else that they can control, even though they're weak, they're sick, they're disabled. They're all these things. Many, many, many people that you can't believe it. They can light fires and they light them all the time. So there are people like that. I haven't met too many that just want to sit around and watch fire burn. I mean, everybody enjoys watching it fire, but the ones that are the most dangerous in that overall group is something I wrote a book on a couple years ago called Wildland Arsonists. They do have the power of a nuclear weapon at their fingertips like no other criminal in the world. And they can burn down a half a state or half a country with just a match. So those are probably your more evil people if they continue to do it. Those type of serial arsonists are the most evil because of the damage that they can do is unbelievable.
Okay. Just as an aside, with the with the amount of fires we've been seeing in the news, just environmental fires, I mean, it seems to have been crazy there the last couple of years. How does that affect the investigation? I mean, there's obviously a lot of manpower, a lot of personnel, I would imagine, would have to be then rooted towards dealing with these massive forest fires that we see in the news. Has that been having an effect on the amount of resource that's then available to investigate, criminal cases?
Yes, and there's two factors at play. It's kind of confusing, but my last 50 interviews on television, online, podcasts have dealt with wildland fires in California, Europe, Southern Europe, everywhere, Australia, of course. And I know most of the reporters that contact me call themselves a climate reporter. So I already know what the questions they're going to ask. They'll say, this uptick in fires, is it related to the climate? I go, well, yes and no. I mean, climate still doesn't cause fires. The only natural things that cause fires are volcanoes and lightning. Other than that, climate makes the fires bigger. Climate change certainly makes them bigger. And you're dealing with, hotter, drier environments and winds, increasing wind speeds. So, the effect of climate certainly makes the ones we get, but we get fires every day by the hundreds of thousands all over. Most of them we're able to control, but because of possibly climate, now that they get bigger. And so they get more media, and the media is focused on it. But a lot of these people in the media have this misconception that it brings out arsonists. There's no documentation at all that a hot day and a windy day or climate change brings out more fire setters. It does not. There's just no documentation in that at all. It just makes the fires that you normally get bigger or more out of control. Well, then it gets a lot more media attention. And you mentioned about the firefighting. Yeah, there's trillions and trillions of dollars poured into firefighting, fire prevention. But guess where no money is put into? Not one penny of that goes to fire investigation.
Really?
There's no more fire investigators in the wildlands now than there was 35 years ago. And it's a crime. And they're going to keep dumping money into this. I said, if you catch an arsonist, your typical wildland arsonist likes 200 fires. If you catch one, you're at least preventing 200 fires. And, the other...
Would your
money at stake.
Would your unit of...
Go ahead.
So, would your unit have been called in to investigate, for example, these recent fires in Los Angeles, which caused so much devastation?
Yes, they were. Yes. Yeah. And I was asked to be a consultant for an agency on this. I'm retired, so I can't do the scenes, but I was asked to be a consultant on those things. And they're neither one of the big ones in Los Angeles is related to not really an arsonist per se. One's related to a power line, that's pretty clear. And the other one's related to a fire that was never put out in the first place. And that fire was caused by somebody lighting fireworks. And then 7 days later, that fireworks fire got kicked up by the winds and became this giant mega fire. They want to blame arsonists. And I always get called and they said, look at all these arson arrests. I said, Los Angeles, we arrest 25 people a day for arson. There's so many arson fires. They never make the news because they're small events usually. And now because of those giant fires, the media is all over it. I said, this happens every single day. Nothing's different than it was before, except a couple of those fires got big and they get the media attention. I know in some areas that there are arsonists that do it, and there's reasons why they do it. In Sicily and Italy, there's reasons why there's fires there. And those are monetary gain fires, some of them. A couple places have some serial arsonists active. But that's not overly common. Most wildland fires are caused by human activity that's not criminal. Okay. Some sort of human activity.
Well, you are absolutely right. Before we started this conversation, you made the comment that we're going to start and you're going to realize after an hour and a half that it's going to feel like we've been chatting for 5 minutes, and it does. I'm just two very simple questions. What is the most difficult case? Just briefly, what is the kind of hardest case that you've ever had to deal with? And on the other side of that, what is the most rewarding case that you've worked on in your career?
Well, difficult as doing a scene is I've dealt with a couple of cases personally where mothers killed their children with fire. Okay. And these are young children. And the scenes are quite difficult to work, as you can imagine, when you have 5 little girls in a room from age 2 up to age 7, and their mother spent hours trying to kill them with fire. That was
Jeez.
difficult to do the scene. When you're doing scenes, you tend to put all that aside and focus on the technical stuff. But maybe later on, when you're preparing for court or you're reviewing all your stuff, it kind of shocks you. And so those sort of scenes get difficult, quite difficult. And I've had a few of those. Usually, when there's children involved, those are extraordinarily difficult to deal with.
Yeah.
Other ones, you asked the most rewarding one. I've been involved in so many major cases because it's Los Angeles. We get a lot of major cases, and 3 of my cases have been named the case of the year internationally for various reasons. They're just so big, so dramatic. Probably the one that right before I met Gerard, I worked on something called the Hollywood serial arson case. And one guy, he was sort of a deranged guy from Germany, lit 52 fires in 3 nights in Los Angeles.
Sure.
So he's lighting 17 fires a night, and he was burning buildings, and it was unbelievable chaos because we don't get serial offenders who have that much energy that can do it three nights in a row. These were major fires. It literally brought the city to its knees, and it brought major agencies, including my own, to its knees. So I stayed awake for 96 hours, myself and a partner, and we caught the guy on the 4th night. Wow. And it went from a whodunit, like we had no idea who was doing this, no reason why. And this is the first time in my career, and probably the last time that I can remember now, that I got to be a Hollywood detective, meaning I got to do what the guys on TV got to do, which is I had 400 investigators assigned to me.
Wow.
And when you have that many people working for you, and I'm used to investigating scenes by myself, at most with 2 or 3 people. And I did not know how to manage 400 people. So I put my ego aside a little bit, and I asked for a homicide commander from LAPD, a different agency, but a person who commands a giant homicide unit, and he ran all the personnel and assigned tasks. And I ended up just assigning myself as the analyst profiler for the event. And I had to assign investigators to look at 52 different scenes and do 52 different investigations all at the same time. And it was overwhelming because we caught the guy the 4th night, and it wasn't luck. People believe it was sort of luck. It wasn't luck at all. We started neighborhood canvases. When you have 400 investigators, by the first night, we had 17 buildings burned. By the next night, we had 24 hours later, we had video. We had 7 videos of a potential suspect who was at all these scenes. We didn't know who he was. He looked unique, which helped us, and he dressed unique. By the 3rd night, we had 2 of his vehicles. And so once we figured out that he came from Germany and then was setting fires in Germany and in Canada, I'm getting all this information at one time on the phone at the same time with German National Police, Canadian Mounties, and psychologists from Germany, because once we arrested him, I consulted psychologists in Germany who was treating him about how I should interview this guy, because he was also autistic, but he was also a war baby from Chechnya, meaning he grew up in a war and he knew military tactics. He absolutely conducted his fire setting spree as a military, like he was on a mission. Anyway, that was the most rewarding because everything we did worked out. It was perfect, and we caught him when he had 17 more incendiary devices in his vehicle. He was going to set 17 more fires when we arrested him. So,
well, if there's a case that sounds like it needs the Hollywood treatment, it's the Hollywood Arsonist, I would imagine, isn't it?
Well, 3 different Hollywood.
Look out for the movie. On that, if
3 different producers wanted to do a movie of it, but they haven't yet.
Well, there's another question, just quickly. If movies that have come out, are there any movies, TV shows that you would point out and go, they kind of got it right?
No.
They got the arson bit right. I mean, there've not been
Nope.
too many. I think of the Backdraft. There was Backdraft with
Backdraft was written by an arson investigator, or at least the story concept was, from Chicago Fire Department. And that character was Robert De Niro, if you recall.
Yeah.
It's got to be 25 years ago. He was a fantastic character, and that was about as close as I've ever seen it being accurate. Of course, how he set the fires was ridiculously complex, but that was the arson investigator portion of that was as accurate as I've ever seen. Nobody's done one since. I've been contacted at least 15 times by production companies, and none of them have ever gotten it off the ground. Now, I understand there's a new one coming out right now, based loosely on the John Orr case. He was the most famous arsonist of all time. We'll see what they do. I know the producers of it. I know the guy who's running it. I don't know. I don't know how it's going to be.
Look, I mean, maybe they can redirect some of the money for the 98th Ted Bundy documentary to some cases seem to get a lot of stories told around them in the kind of mainstream, and some. It's interesting. You don't see a lot of arson media out there, do you? Like TV shows, documentary series. You don't see a lot.
There's a reason for it, and I figured it out because I've been contacted by numerous production companies, and they've tried. A few of them have tried to turn my books into movies or shows. A couple have tried to turn my career into a show. One writer now is doing books on me or on my cases. It's fiction. Hollywood doesn't like fires because it costs money to make. That's the big problem.
Oh.
And now, with computers and whatnot, even good CGI computers, it looks like crap mostly. They don't like that. And then Hollywood, the big wigs that really run Hollywood are not the producers that you meet, that I meet. They're really low-level people. They don't have the power. They might have a great idea, and they talk me through it, and I help them for months, and they go, okay, this is a really good idea, and I think it's going to be good. And then they get it to the big, huge decision makers in Hollywood, and all they see is, oh, it's a fireman story. We've seen these. The firemen pull pranks on each other, and they have this mindset that it's about firemen. I said, it's about arsonists. And there's more good stories about arsonists than there are about murderers. And you people keep regurgitating the same stupid stories about murderers over and over and over again and putting them on TV. And you don't do the arson ones. And they go, well, they don't like the costs of having fires.
Yeah.
And trying to film in a burned building or something. They don't like that. And they don't like, they have a mindset that it's just about firemen, goofy firemen pulling pranks on each other. And it's not. It has nothing to do with firefighters. I'm waiting for somebody to do a good one.
Yeah. Maybe a good time then as well to talk about your work as an author. I'm going to bring up an image here where we can see some of. Here we go. So talk us through some of your. Tell us a little bit about your trajectory as an author, and where did it get started? And you say you're busy with books at the moment. Just talk us through that part of your life. Well,
I started to be an author after I had about 11 years as an arson investigator because I didn't think I was qualified to talk about it. And the first book is on the upper left. It's called Tortured Minds, and I'm well aware that I spelled the title wrong. I did that on purpose. And a lot of people try and tell me I spelled it wrong. But there's a joke in all my stuff. I'm a very sarcastic person, and there's a lot of jokes and things in my stuff. And that book is about serial arsonists. And I wrote that after listening to a bunch of these talking heads on TV talking about serial arsonists after a major event. And I realized they didn't know anything about what they were talking about. So I did a bunch of research. I looked at 66 serial arsonists, and I put them in that book in short case histories. So very short, easy reading. And then I do an analysis of each case. It's the first time I attempted to do a little bit of profiling analysis.
Okay.
And then the book on the upper right is the book I mentioned about the most evil arsonists I've ever run across. They're all true, but I made the cover and the stories really like Hollywood versions. They're true. They're absolutely true. And a lot of people ask me if those are really true or they're fake. They're true. And they're the most evil ones I've ever dealt with.
Okay.
The book that sold the most is the Arsonist Profiles. I wrote that after meeting Gerard, and he inspired me to put some of my stuff in. And I wanted to talk about all the different types of arsonists there are. And there are hundreds of different types, because the media has forever painted one picture of an arsonist, and it's so inaccurate. It fits everybody and nobody. And so it's just really not accurate. And the FBI had a profile of an arsonist, and it's the same thing. It's so vague, it fits most of the guys I've ever worked with. So it's not very helpful in actually catching. So I tried to do that. And then my last two books I wrote were specific requests by groups. The Fire Death book is my bestseller. It's sold thousands and thousands of copies. It's sold at all the homicide and profiling schools. That's the yellow book in the lower right. And that's a textbook with a lot of graphic photos on fire death investigation. And I sell several thousand copies a year of that. And then the most recent one is on the lower left. The Wildland investigators reached out to me after I wrote the Fire Death book and said, can you do something like that for the Wildland community? And that's just a book on how to conduct wildland arson investigations, and there's profiling and geospatial analysis in that book. So all those books are available if they look at my website, arsonprofiler.com. And that's how you can get those books. Some of them are on Amazon, some of them are not. There's reasons for that, and I won't go into those reasons. Okay. But I don't know how it handles shipping, but shipping out of the U.S. for me is quite expensive to some places.
Okay.
Anyway, thank you for bringing up my books, and a couple of them sold a lot of books.
Great. We'll put up.
Well deserved.
We'll put up the address there for your site as well for folks to go and look at. Gerard.
No, I was just going to say, well deserved. I mean, those books, like you said, I read those ones: the Tortured Minds, the Freaks, Fire Raisers, and the Profile one. And I mean, they were just phenomenal books. And it's also interesting to see how your writing is developed over that period of time. And like you said yourself, you've changed so much from just 10 years ago. And I mean, was there a particular case, and this is perhaps my last question, was there a particular case that kind of made you want to delve into more the profiling side of it, the understanding of the person behind it, compared to just gathering the evidence at the scene and, linking a person? What was that particular case that made you want to think more about the profiling part?
That case, and I'm glad you brought that up, was in that book called Fire Raisers, Freaks, and Fiends. I think it's in that book. And now I forgot what I put in my own book. But it's the book about a guy who was killing cats. And I like to use alliteration in some of my titles just to humor myself. And it's called The Crazed Cat Killer of El Caminito. He's a serial arsonist that tried to murder all his neighbors. Very wealthy person. And his neighbors were wealthy people, and he had a very wealthy, famous attorney. And that attorney really grilled me in court for the trial went on for 5 years. And that is how I got into the profiling aspect of the person and looked at what he was doing besides lighting fires, because he only lit 4 fires that I'm aware of. But he was a serial child molester and a serial cat killer of all things. And it gave great insight to these crimes that we think are all different. Actually, the behavior by him was consistent throughout his fire crimes as it was his other crimes. He was also a serial vandal of his neighbors, a serial peeping Tom. And the guy was a genius. He was a government scientist, and he was rich too. He was a multimillionaire. And so it was a fascinating case because Hollywood and the general public has an idea of what an arsonist is. And this guy did not look like what an arsonist is. And it didn't fit the jury's minds and doesn't fit anybody else's minds. But if you look at his actions across 5 different types of crimes, murdering cats, dozens and dozens of them, and peeping, he was a peeper, staring into neighbors' windows and vandalizing all his neighbors. And he did it just out of fun. He didn't need the money. It was out of fun. And that is the first of many guys like that I've met. He was probably the most evil guy I've ever met. And he didn't kill anybody that I'm aware of. And I've met many murderers, many serial murderers. And he's the most evil he just liked screwing with people. And so I just, that's the guy who will someday, if I think he's dead now. If not, he's in his mid 80s, but he's the guy that will come back after me someday. And, can't wait to meet him. But I sat and interviewed the guy, and he just chuckled the whole time I interviewed him. Very, very unnerving guy.
Sounds like
that.
Can imagine.
does sound like the kind of guy that Gerard seems to come across a lot.
I wish that I had
Gerard's...
Gerard on that particular case. That was a case I go, I think I'm over my head with this guy. This guy's like one of those arch villains that you see in cartoons.
Gerard is a magnet for these types of people.
Yeah. Lucky me.
We had a couple of things we were going to do, but I mean, guys, we've been talking nearly for 2 hours already. So I suppose we should think a little bit about wrapping up. So. Yeah, it'll be lovely to do a deep dive into a case the next time, a little bit down the road from now. I would hate to leave without seeing Gerard do a little bit of practical fire training. So we've got a nice clip here. Maybe you can, from the training, and maybe you can just talk us through it a little bit, guys. But here we go. I'll bring it up.
This is the Molotov right here.
This is Gerard holding a Molotov cocktail in his hands. We're gonna light it.
Very excited about throwing it.
A little bit. How are you feeling right now, Gerard? Are you worried it was gonna go off in your hand, or? There we go.
I know I was in good hands with it.
Okay.
So part of that was to demystify the Molotov cocktails. In Los Angeles, street gang members use these things. We saw them on a weekly basis. Our agency had like 30,000 of them that I'm aware of in our records, and very common item. They're very intimidating. All right. If someone was throwing them at my house, I'd be very worried, or at my car, I'd be very worried. But as an actual functioning weapon, they're not very good. They don't work how people think they work. You can, if I didn't tell Gerard to throw that, he could have sat there and held that thing till he got bored holding it for the next half hour, because it would have just continued to burn like that in his hand as the gasoline is being wicked out of the bottle until it all evaporates and burns away. It would just be like this, just like that.
Okay. Just like a candle.
What happens is when he breaks it, he aerates the gasoline. And I mentioned earlier that aerated gasoline is explosive. So the harder you throw it and the harder surface that it hits, the more air it gets and it spreads faster. The problem with it, gasoline is highly volatile and it burns away within seconds. If we were to just follow that little fireball that he created, unless there's something for it to catch on fire, that'll be gone in a minute. So if you used correctly, it's a very effective weapon. But luckily, the people that use these don't really understand how they work. And 90% of the time, they create very small fires, if any fire at all. They just kind of fizzle away. They don't blow up. It's a big myth. But used against vehicles nowadays, they don't work very well because vehicles are soft-sided. The materials we make our vehicles out of, kind of bottles just bounce off of them. So you have a little fire in the street. And if people throw them at a home in California, the homes here are not made out of brick or anything because of our earthquakes. So everything's made out of wood or stucco, which is those bottles just bounce off of. So they're not a great weapon. They scare you. They're very scary. They're very intimidating, but they're not the best weapon to use.
Okay. Again, this has just popped into my head, but are you aware of there's a South African, it's called a necklacing, where a rubber tire is placed around. And I know, back in the day, especially fairly commonplace around here. I mean, just any comments on that it seems to be a fairly unique South African type of action.
Well, the ones I've seen from South Africa were with the tire around the neck.
Yeah.
And then the tire is soaked in like a diesel or something else. And people would say, why don't they use gasoline? Gasoline will kill you quicker. I mean, so by putting something not as volatile as gasoline, you're actually torturing the person more. It's evil beyond evil. And like you said, if, once it gets on like the internet, now the drug lords in South America have tried to one up the South Africans. And now what they do is they take a person and they stack a whole stack of truck tires and they stand them in it.
Wow.
And they light the bottom tire on fire.
Sure.
Now think about that.
Oh, wow.
Sure.
I mean, and not to be graphic on your thing here, if you poured fuel over your head, gasoline, just over your own head, and you ignited it, and some people commit suicide that way. I've attended about 13 suicides like that. It's not an instantaneous death, but it's a pretty quick death. You breathe, if your head and face are on fire, you're breathing fire gases, and you're going to be dead pretty quickly. But it's not instantaneous, so it's still pretty bad. But the human body runs around. Even if it's dead, it'll run around for quite some bit. And it's big. We've seen guys run a half a mile on fire. They're dead. They just don't know it yet. So that's pretty horrible. Imagine being stuck in one place and slowly burning. That's 10 times worse.
Yeah.
And you're not instantaneously dying mercifully. You're slowly being cooked, and that is, the human mind can get really dark on what it conjures up. And these drug lords now, out of intimidation in Mexico and South America, are coming up with worse and worse ways all the time, and just to just scare people to death. And it's working. They're not just going to shoot you; they're going to do something way, way worse. And so, anyway,
look,
I've seen those. Yeah.
It's certainly something to consider is that fire and our ancient kind of command of it as a species, but also that very, very deep set fear of fire that I'm sure is kind of built into all of our DNA. Fire is a very scary thing to use against humans, isn't it?
Yes, it's very intimidating, and it brings unbelievable fear.
Yeah.
If someone throws gasoline on somebody else, they'll run right through walls to get away from. They know it's coming. They'll, even before someone lights them on fire, they'll literally jump out of moving vehicles or run through walls to get away from it. So that's the fear that it brings, and it's extraordinarily intimidating if it's used that way.
Yeah.
I've heard that fire is one of the few things that'll cause someone to overcome their maternal instincts. Like if your house is on fire, your kids are in the other room, you'll jump out as a parent. You'll jump out of your own window because of that primal fear. I don't know if that's just a urban legend kind of thing, but it kind of can cause people to override their maternal instincts.
So that fear itself, yes, and I would agree with you. There used to be, because fire investigation was done so poorly in our history, everywhere. We believe that if a mother ran out of a burning house and left their child, then she must have set the fire to kill her child. And that's just not true. Your own, fear for your own safety is overriding. And I know that a lot of mothers would say a mother would never do this. Well, you and I have been to crime scenes where the mother's the one that killed the kids. That's exactly who kills kids, is mothers, way more than anybody else, more than strangers, more than husbands. It's, if their child is under 5, it is most likely the mother that killed that child, most likely. And mothers use water, drowning, poison in the form of all kinds of forms, and fire, because it's something that anybody can light a fire. And I've studied about 50 some cases of filicide by fire, and it's always a mother, and testified in some cases in court. And people say, well, a mother wouldn't do that. That's exactly who does that. Sure. Now, to answer your question, though, an accidental fire, people react out of pure panic and fear, and they do things that they're shocked that they did. Later on, when you see the video, they run out of houses with their kid in there. They'll run and grab their cell phone and forgot that they have a baby in there. And they're not trying to kill their child. They're just panicked. It's pure panic. And, until you're in that position, you don't know how anybody would react. We all say, oh, I would react this way. Until if you're prepared in your mind ahead of time, you'll probably act correctly. But, emergencies, explosions, and fires happen when you're not prepared. And people just, when we have video, so much video now, people just panicking and running away from their own children. And then they come back and they go, oh my God. And then they forget that they did that, or they're embarrassed that they did that. And they tend to lie to investigators a lot. That's a common thing too. Okay. So yeah, it does overwhelm the maternal instinct and paternal instinct at times.
Well, I mean, it's been an incredible conversation for the last 2 hours, and I could quite easily go on for another 2 hours, I'm sure, because I've got a ton more questions.
We've never spoken this long to anybody, so
no, exactly. But I mean, we've got some great cases we could touch on as well. Maybe get your thoughts on them down the line.
Sure.
We would love you to be a friend of Profiler down here in Africa, and we'd love to have you back again and again as over the next couple of years. Gerard, do you have any last thoughts, questions, comments?
No, just, obviously there's a lot more we could talk about, but like you said, the time is come to our natural end. But thank you so much again. Your willingness always, from the day I met you at the course to you coming out to giving us training, and the contact we've had over the years, I've always been very, very generous with your time, and and just very open about what you know and what you don't know. And it's always been it's great to meet people like that, sort of, who have that kind of really just great helping mindset. So thank you. And definitely the next time we're going to see you, we're going to have an in-depth deep dive into one of your serial cases. And like Paul said, maybe after that, we'll see where we go.
I can't wait. Thank you.
Great. Cool. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Gerard, I will see you again. We are recording this on Monday the 28th, and I'll see you again tomorrow night for our live. Yes. I look forward to that. And guys, thank you very much for tuning in. Thanks, Ed. Thanks, Gerard. I am going to jump back to just going to bring me up here and say goodnight to everyone. Please do hit the subscribe button if you haven't. Like the episode. You're welcome to become a member. We do post additional content on the page for members, and we're going to be starting to flight our series South African Serial, which are 1 hour standalone episodes on individual cases. Speaking to some of the key people involved in those cases. The first one we're going to make available to everyone, but then post that, it'll go live a little bit earlier for our members, and then you'll be able to pick it up about a week later of everybody else. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. If you've stuck with us for the 2 hours, well done. But I think a really amazing 2 hours, because a topic that we don't often get to talk about, and what better way to do it than with one of the best minds in the business on the planet. We're so lucky to have Gerard and his network, and the team putting the channel together here. So thank you very much, everyone. My name is Paul Llewellyn. This is Profiler Africa, and don't forget, trust no one. Okay.
I am a human being and I killed human beings.
Before I knew it, I'd fired 4 shots at the door. I kept on shouting for Riva to phone the police.
Tests are underway to determine if a serial killer is on the loose in Centurion, Pretoria.
The dead won't bother you. It's the living you got to worry about.